Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the main meeting of the Overview Scrutiny Committee at Norfolk District Council. I should say that this is the first time that we have met as a committee in this venue since March of last year, 14 months ago. And so, having gotten used to the various protocols of remote meetings via Zoom, we now have to get used to a slightly different arrangement, whereby the committee are in the council chamber, and so are some other members and officers. But the majority of the officers will be joining us and contributing via Zoom, and we have the public attending via YouTube. So that's the first time that we will have had that combination as far as this committee is concerned. But the usual, I think, protocols still apply with regard to making sure that our microphones are switched off and switched on when we are talking, and that we talk quite closely to the microphone, because sound quality, I think, may be an issue. We'll have to wait and see how the meeting progresses, but we certainly do need to be able to hear everybody speaking. So we will hear officers via the two speakers at either end of the council chamber. I think if we can just make sure our mobile phones are switched off, and that we will take, then we will get on and start the meeting. So welcome everybody, and if we can start off with item number 1, to receive apologies for absence.
Yes, we just had apologies from Councillor Adam Barley.
Thank you. And I note that we don't have Councillor Fisher here. Does anybody know?
I think we said that he may turn up shortly, so we'll wait and see on that.
Yes, Councillor Barker.
I spoke to Councillor Fisher last night, and it was certainly his intention to be here if he could be. Okay,
we will wait and see then, thank you. And I take it with no substitutes in play there. Thank you. Public questions and statements?
None received.
Thank you. Turning to item 4 then, the minutes of the last meeting. We'll go through them first of all, please, for accuracy. Page 1. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Are you all comfortable that they are a true and accurate representation of that meeting? That I should sign them as such. Thank you very much. So moving on then to item 5, items of urgent business.
So I emailed everyone this. It's just a fairly routine item to make a recommendation to full council for the NPOS appointments, as they are supposed to be scrutiny representatives. The document I emailed you essentially showed a continuation of the existing arrangements. So I just need a vote on a recommendation if you're happy to continue with that, essentially.
Okay. Are we all content that the status quo is carried over effectively into the next year? Show of hands then, please.
Could I just have a proposal in a second?
Oh, yes. Proposer a seconder. Councillor Fredericks is a proposer. Councillor Fredericks is a seconder. Show of hands.
Okay, noted. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Thank you for that. Declarations of interest then. Item number 6, referring to the page, the diagrams, which give us some guidance on declarations of interest and how we should treat those. Do we have anybody? Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. I have a pecuniary interest to declare on item, agenda item for number 14. So with your kind of permission, I would withdraw from the meeting at the end of item 30 and rejoin at the beginning of item 15 and subsequent items, if that meets with your approval, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Yes, thank you for advising me yesterday of your situation and declaring that this morning. Any other declarations? No? Okay, thank you. Item number 7, petitions from members of the public.
None received.
Thank you. Number 8, consideration of any matter referred to the committee by a chair. I'm not aware of it.
Again, none received.
Number 9, responses of the council or the cabinet to the committee's reports or recommendation. So the meeting on the 10th of April, cabinet approved the following recommendations, which I think were verbatim as reported to cabinet. So I won't read through those. They are all as I said, recommended to cabinet, all 3 of them. So I think we'll let that one stand as it is. If you're happy to note that. Thank you. Turning to item 10 then, which is the Norfolk County Community Safety Partnership draft Safer Norfolk Plan for 2021 through till 2024. Give a comment on the Norfolk County Community Safety Partnership.
So Steve Holmes is now ready to join us on the live stream, so if everyone can look at the projector screen. We're just going to check we can hear you, Steve, if you just want to speak up.
Yeah, I'm here.
Just bear with me, I'm just going to turn that volume a bit.
We're very faint, so let's just get it adjusted.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want to try again, Steve?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Still faint.
Okay, try that.
Try again. Am I coming? Are you receiving?
We're probably going to have to ask you to speak loudly if that's okay, Steve.
Okay, not only do you get me on your large screen, which I apologise to all members for, I get to shout at you as well. Okay, Chair, if I may, this item, and I will try and keep this brief on that basis. This item has come forward from the Norfolk County Community Safety Partnership. They would have been here to present it themselves, but obviously the restrictions in terms of numbers, etc., has prevented that, and unfortunately, county are not able to Zoom. And so as the representative on the Norfolk County Community Safety Partnership for North Norfolk, you've got me just to introduce this and to give you a bit of an overview. So by way of background, the Norfolk Community Safety County Community Safety Partnership basically came together in 2012 when 7 district-based community safety partnership merged. That's on the basis that there is a requirement for responsible authorities to create a community safety partnership to work together to address issues associated with crime and disorder, alcohol, substance misuse, ASB, and behaviour that has a negative effect on the local environment, amongst other things. And in terms of that duty to form a county community safety partnership, there was also a requirement on those authorities to undertake an annual assessment, a strategic assessment of the crime and disorder and other issues that I've just alluded to within the area. So within Norfolk, there is a requirement to undertake an annual strategic assessment to then determine the priorities based on that assessment and to consult on the public with the priorities that are identified. And then from there to draw up and publish a partnership plan. So this document basically has been produced by the Norfolk County Community Safety Partnership, so by the partnership, on the basis that the previous plan ran to 2018 and therefore needs review. The previous plan had as its main 3 priorities: domestic abuse and sexual violence, county lines, and preventing terrorism. And I think it's fair to say that the landscape for community safety and community protection has changed slightly when the previous plan was written, not least of which that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a significant impact on the interaction between communities, and that's led to this shift in community safety needs. So I think, you know, there have also that have impacted on this a number of duties that have come in. So the serious violence duty, the Domestic Abuse Act receives royal assent, and the Home Office priority for area policing all have an impact on the direction of travel of this strategic plan. And then, of course, just recently on May the 6th, we had the election of a new Police and Crime Commissioner, which will no doubt give rise to a slightly new strategic direction through their police and crime plan. So this the process that this has been through in terms of the plan is that effectively all of the Norfolk County Community Safety Partnership responsible authorities were asked what their priorities were, so what their issues were, and what a delivery structure should look like in order to do that. There was then a draft strategic plan formed, which has been through or been based on a Norfolk strategic assessment. I think whereas previously we would have looked at the number of reported crimes, etc., there is now an approach that uses what's called the Cambridge Harm Index. So the Cambridge Harm Index basically looks at how harmful different crimes are in proportion to others, and it gives us a better, I suppose, more weight to more harmful crimes. So those more serious crimes, distinguishing them from those that are least or not least, are less harmful to others. So minor theft, criminal damage, common assault. And I think that means that there is a weighting rather than just a numbers of cases reported. There is actually a weighting to the approach that reflects the seriousness of those crimes that have been reported. So I think just in terms of this report, the approach sets out the strategic plan sets out the strategic themes of the County Community Safety Partnership and around building resilient and cohesive communities, tackling neighbourhood crime, reducing the threat of criminal exploitation, and safeguarding communities from harm of abuse and serious violence. And so the priorities that are set out in the plan that reflect that are those priorities that are before you. So that, and I apologise for not having it up on screen and taking you through this, but it is in the report. So under 9B, the proposed priorities are the serious violence, including domestic abuse, sexual abuse, and county lines linked violence, preventing extremism, including uphold responsibilities under the prevent duty, criminal exploitation, including modern slavery and county lines, neighbourhood crime, including acquisitive crime, antisocial behaviour, community tensions and hate crime, and fraud. So I think in terms of, I'm not intending to go through the paper in detail. I think from a point of view of the approach, this document goes out for public consultation for 8 weeks on the 24th of May. And it's already been through the County Community Safety Partnership Scrutiny panel. And obviously it will go back to them once the, as a draft or comments on the draft, once this consultation process has been completed. So I suppose the thing for scrutiny is the question of, does scrutiny feel that the priorities that have been set in the Norfolk County Community Safety Partnership Strategic Plan, are they appropriate? And any other comments on the document that you would like to feed in? Is it an acceptable plan? And can you, I suppose sign off is the wrong word, but can you, as scrutiny, are you supportive of that plan? And if not, can you suggest any changes that you would like to see? I'm sorry, that's quite a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully I'll be able to answer any questions that you might have. And if I can't answer those questions at this stage because they're of a more technical nature, I can get you responses to those hopefully quite quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Officer Hemmings, for that presentation. I think most of us will understand that you are presenting on behalf of, rather than the author behind the paper. I think it's worth just mentioning, of course, that it's 2 months ago since we had a report from the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office with regard to the activities of the police. To some extent, this is, if you like, almost part 2 of that activity, really. Because my understanding is that many of the activities that are funded in this plan or are in the plan are funded by the Police and Crime Commissioner on a commissioned basis. I may be wrong, but that was my understanding. I'm also, I suppose, a little bit concerned in one sense that in the 2 years that we've been running, I think this is the first time that we've had community safety report and a plan of this nature on our agenda. And although many years ago I was involved with district community safety partnerships and was aware of the changes that have been made in restructuring in 2012 or thereabouts, I'm not sure that every member on our committee today is wholly versed on where the community safety partnership sits within the structure of crime prevention across the county. It's been relatively low profile, I have to say, on our agenda, and this is the first time, as I said, we've cited a plan of this sort. So, and mindful that you may well not be well equipped to answer some questions, but I think what we ought to be able to do is to, where there are questions which are you're not able to answer, then they will be forwarded to the author of the document, and we can pick them up at a later point, at a later meeting, hopefully the next meeting actually. But I think there is a context here that we are slightly disadvantaged, as I said, in not kind of seeing something like this on our agenda before. But anyway, let's open it up for questions. So, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking through the report. I do think there's one surprising omission. When I look at one of the national newspapers at the weekend, it said that Norfolk has the unenviable record of having the most speeding offences in England. Just looking through statistics, what I found on Google, I see that the average number of deaths is about about well, 2018 it was 28, since the casualties from road deaths, 2017 30, 16 35, and similar figures going back over the previous 10 years. Therefore, I am surprised there's nothing in the report about targeting, speeding, and reducing that events, those number of road casualties, and reducing the number of speeding points.
Thank you. Mr. Hammond.
Yeah, in terms of the priorities, it wasn't one that was identified in terms of the road deaths by the partners. I suspect in terms of the priorities, it's probably a policing priority rather than necessarily a partner priority, but it may be one of the areas that Scrutiny wishes to feed back in terms of their comments back to the Community Safety Partnership in respect of the document. But I don't have any information for you as to why it was not considered. Only that the priorities were discussed amongst the partners, and it wouldn't have been one of those that was identified. And Chair, could I just come back at this point, just to you on a couple of things that I probably omitted to tell you in terms of the areas that you raised. So in terms of funding, yes, a lot of work is commissioned by the OPPC, so the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, in terms of that, but also that my understanding is that they are now putting forward around £500,000 worth of funding committed from the OPCC into community safety, almost for partners to be able to, I wouldn't say bid into, I may be doing that disservice and an injustice, but there is some funding available to tackle some of these things on a partner basis. And then the second thing that you raised in terms of the items coming forward to this agenda, I can certainly have that conversation around a more regular update on activities within the County Community Safety Partnership. I think it's fair to say that in previous times that although working very closely together, there was a degree of separation between the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner staff and the local authority staff who were working on these issues. But since November of last year, the OPCC for Norfolk and the Norfolk County Council have signed a memorandum of understanding such that they have now created a single community safety team that are responsible for supporting and working directly with the chair of the Norfolk County Community Safety Partnership. So I would hope that they will be more able to support in terms of coming to or providing updates for Overview and Scrutiny Committee in the future. Apologies to run the two things together there.
Thank you very much indeed for that response. Just going back to the original question, I would have to say that in my experience in covering the parish councils that I do, that is a regular topic that gets raised, and I would suggest that that's probably across not just this district but also across the county as well. And I think you raise a very good point, Councillor Cushing, and I think it's one that I haven't thought about, I have to say, but you're absolutely right. It doesn't seem to be there in any degree, and it certainly ought to be one feature in community safety. Community safety is meant to be about those wider aspects of safety that don't always come to your minds easily. So we'll probably pick that one up as a point to carry forward and as a question for a response next meeting. So thank you for that. Just a second.
Thank you, Chair. I think that as well, that there wasn't anything about it. That's a hot topic.
Could I ask you just to speak a little nearer the mic? I'm
Yeah.
not sure that everybody.
So, yeah, I pick that up as well. There's absolutely nothing about speeding in here, and also about drug offences. And I guess that because this is a really good start, this document, but there's not a lot of meat in the bones of how we're actually going to tackle this and what's going to happen in the future. I'd recommend that we bring this back with what we're actually going to do, maybe in a few months after the most recent police crime commissioner has put his feet under the table, because this could all change. Am I wrong in that? Because, as you quite rightly said, Chair, I've got no not prior knowledge of this partnership at all, so I really don't know how it works, who influences it. So I just really think that could be something that we bring it back after the police crime commissioner has had a look at this and see what his priorities are. Perhaps it'll change. Thank you.
Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sort of concerned about how it's going to be implemented, because I've got a particular case in my ward of fraud, significant fraud where a company has been cloned. Cloning has taken the VAT number, the company's house number, and basically the Facebook page as well. The company in question had no help from the police, no help from HM Customs and Excise, no help from trading standards, and it came down last week to getting Jerome Mayhew to actually ask questions of serious fraud. So, the document is really evidence gathering. I see they're using the public health law, which is fair enough. But, we've got on page 21, 5,000 reports of fraud made in a year in Norfolk. And yet there's no agency to deal with fraud. So, it's all very well to have a big document that we're looking at today, but we need to know how to implement it.
Councillor Haynes, would you like to comment on either of those two last questions?
Chair, I think in terms of the document that you have before you, it is a strategic document. So it's about setting out the priorities of the community safety partnership. It is not an operational, it will be for the Police and Crime Commissioner to set out his crime and policing plan. So that is a separate document. This is about the strategic priorities of the Norfolk County Community Safety Partnership. And I think, we need to bear in mind that this is a much wider, so it's all the responsible authorities. So the responsible authorities range from, the county and district councils, the police, probation, community rehabilitation company, fire, NHS clinical commissioning groups, and then there are wider partners from that, including youth offending teams, trading standards, the registered providers for housing. So I think we're looking at this as a strategic document, in as much as this is setting out the priorities for the county community safety partnership. It is. It's not setting out the policing priorities for the district. They are, in terms of the issues that are in here, and I recognise that fraud is one of the priorities, because it does have an impact across a wide range of those responsible authorities that form the community safety partnership. But I think in terms of specific cases, they are individual policing matters, and obviously the police have to manage things in accordance with their standards of evidence and all of those. So I wouldn't want members to look at this as a policing position. This is about setting the strategic direction for a partnership of a wide-ranging group of bodies for the next few years. In terms of the previous question, I'm afraid I missed the beginning of it, as to what was the important issue that was raised, and that the fact it was lacking. So I can't comment. Matt, are you able to just give me the essence of, because you're coming through louder than other people?
So was that Wendy's question, or?
Yes.
Wendy, did you just want to repeat the point you raised for Stephen? Just get as close to the mic as you reasonably can. Apologies.
The question was about the police crime commissioner. So we've got a new police crime commissioner. Are his priorities going to change his document, or is, I don't understand how it works. So thank you for explaining that the document's about partnership with police and other agencies, because I thought this was a policing document. So thank you for highlighting that. But with the new police crime commissioner, is this going to change?
So thank you for that question. In terms of, clearly, anybody who is duly elected will have an ability to influence the direction of travel of that organisation. So clearly, in the same way that members of the North Norfolk District Council will make decisions on direction of travel and policy, etc., that clearly will be the case. However, this document transcends just one authority. So I think, from the point of view of the responsibility to form the action plan, or the plan, if you like, the strategic plan, that responsibility lies with the responsible authorities, and it has to be based on that strategic assessment. So from that point of view, that strategic assessment defines what goes into the plan, rather than necessarily just what an elected individual would wish to prioritise. And I think where the OPCC, or the Police and Crime Commissioner, will be focused is on his priorities for the crime and policing plan, and so that will affect how the policing element may well interact with this. But bear in mind that underpinning all of that, there is legislation and duties to cooperate and to participate around, so there's the serious violence duty, there's the prevent duty, there are those things that come in there that basically provide a framework, if you like, for the basis of tackling priorities. I hope that answers the question adequately, but if not, I can take these away and ask for further response if you would like.
I'm getting nods of agreement from Councillor Frederick, so that's encouraging. But I think it's probably raising a broader point here, and I'm thinking about how we might develop an approach here that might meet our needs and fit in with what, as you reasonably say, is a strategic document. And I'm also mindful, as I said, that there's this separation between the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office and this Norfolk County or County Council orientated partnership. And I wonder if, as we go through and we identify particular concerns from members, whether those concerns can be put to both the Community Safety Partnership as probably items that need to be responded to. And also we copy those into the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office, because if he's at the point of reviewing priorities, then this would be our opportunity of injecting into his range of considerations our views expressed today. And then we can, I think we will inevitably bring the matter back in one way, shape or form. But perhaps next meeting we'll be dealing with answers to questions And it would be interesting to see also whether the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office had any responses to those questions as well. So I'm wondering whether that would be an approach that would be sensible, and is that something that you would see as a reasonable way forward?
Yes, absolutely, Chair. I see no reason why you can't feed. I mean, obviously today you're being asked to comment on the Norfolk County Community Safety Partnership strategic plan. I would like, but clearly if you have things that as a committee think that overlap into or would inform the crime policing plan that the Police and Crime Commissioner will be forming in the next period of time, then that would be sensible to have that influence, because clearly if they're important to you as issues for the strategic plan, then they will be important where the policing element of that overlaps. So there's nothing to stop you from doing that.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll just bear that in mind.
May I just come back to the point? I wasn't actually raising the point about fraud in the context of the plan specifically, but it's all about to have a plan, but we need a really detailed, concise agency response to how things will be implemented. And it's all very well having a plan, but if, as my case has illustrated, we need to know how that's going to be implemented. It's clearly it can't be implemented at the moment because this has to go to the serious forward. So I use that as an example, but it's the agency behind it. We want some comfort from those that this plan could be implemented as we would understand it needs to be.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to comment on that, Mr. Hens?
Chair, I think it's entirely appropriate for you to seek some more detail at a later stage on how those priorities will be implemented, and I think it would be entirely appropriate as a scrutiny panel or overview and scrutiny for you in the future to look at scrutinising how the County Community Safety Partnership are performing against their intended priorities. So I think those are very valid comments, and I would expect that in terms of the new team that has been formed in terms of this single team, they have appointed some now two. I think they're calling them community safety officers, although I could be wrong on that. But those will be allocated. They will be referenced into districts, such that the intent is that they will improve that line of communication. And I would hope that, in terms of the point you made earlier, that it may be possible to look at having regular updates provided into overview and scrutiny from the community safety relevant to officers relevant to North Norfolk in respect to the priorities that form the plan.
Yes, thank you for that. You very neatly preempted a couple of questions I had my own because I was going to ask with regard to those community safety officers, who are they and how many are there around? Because I'm not aware of them. They are not visible to me, and so there's something to be followed up there. The other question that I had was how are outcomes reported and monitored, and particularly by this district council and indeed ourselves, because this is the first time we've seen this topic. We certainly haven't been monitoring. We haven't even been aware really of the existence of this partnership, to be rather blunt about it. So we're starting from, I think, a low base. Councillor Mancini. Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was sort of my question. I noticed that we've got 500,000 ring-fenced. How do we actually get to that figure, and is that enough? And my other point really is a lot of this document I see is mainly police-led. Now, if we're going to adopt this piece of work, how do we sort of tally up at the police, and how many officers did we have working on this at any one time? Because clearly it's quite a big brief. And if you're going to go down this approach, we need to sort of set up a liaison team said to monitor this and also to make sure we have enough money for it. Just a whole question, Mr. House, then maybe show some light on it. Thank you.
So in terms of the £500,000 of funding, my understanding is that's across Norfolk and will be available for partner agencies to put in for on specific community safety initiatives that meet the priority areas. I don't have any more detail from that at this stage. In terms of, and I'm sorry, Chair, it is quite difficult on the audio just to pick up all of the questions. So if I miss anything, please shout and remind me of stuff. So in terms of do we need a team to liaise into that? So the Community Safety Partnership has been in existence since 2012. We've always had representation into the main county Community Safety Partnership. So in terms of that, the actual partnership body itself, at the moment, that is myself, and I attend those meetings. And then off that, there are a number of meetings that support. So there's the local organised crime group. There is the county lines steering. There are multiple groups that fit within there. A domestic abuse and sexual violence board. And we have different officers that represent into those groups based on the expertise and the knowledge of those officers and how those things cut across into their service areas. Now, we're currently, as a local authority, obviously just been through a management review. We've got some different responsibilities and different teams come together. And so at the moment, we're reviewing who attends those meetings in order to make sure that we get the right representation into those groups, but also that those groups provide added value for us as a local authority from our participation, etc., and that we're able to adequately contribute and influence the direction that we have to reflect the North Norfolk needs. So I think in terms of that, we wouldn't be in a position, because I don't think, we have brought teams together, we have brought service areas together, but I don't think there would be a desire to have a single team interacting with that, because it's such a cross-cutting theme that goes across a number of our activities. In terms of the position around that interaction back in and understanding, I think it's recognised, and it's one of the reasons they brought it together, that they have, there is a need to have better district representation or representation into the districts and communication and engagement with the districts. And I think the reason that it's not been forthcoming at the moment is because they're literally just recruiting into those posts. So one of the previous post holders just retired. They've just appointed into another post to lead the community safety team, and they are recruiting. I think one of the people's in post and one is due to start very shortly. So I hope that Councillor Mancini-Boyler, was there another part to your question?
No, Mr. Hens, that's a good answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I hope that sort of summed it up. But yeah, I recognise fully for this committee that we need to, both as district council officers and as part of the community safety partnership, to probably do some work in order to bring you up to a level of understanding in terms of what elements the county community safety partnership have been covering.
Thank you for that. Councillor Brown, and then Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we can approve a strategy plan such as this with confidence, except the success of it and the delivery of it will depend in large part on the effectiveness of the police. As we know, the funding for the police by successive governments, but in particular the last two administrations, has been reduced. We've lost 10, if not 20,000 police constables. We've seen on the eradication of special constables in certain areas. So it should come as no surprise really that we are top of the league in terms of speeding offences nationally, because the overwhelming impression I get when I contact the police to deal with issues in my particular district is that they simply don't have the resources to put out a high-profile police presence on our roads to identify speeding motorists. So I can't recall when I last saw a roadside police vehicle, for example. Now, they may be using other methods. However, the impression I get, and it's unfortunate we don't have somebody representing the police here to give their views, that there are serious cutbacks in funding. So low-lying fruit, such as the Cambridge analysis would probably conclude in respect of motoring offences, will not be capable of being pursued and prosecuted in sufficient numbers. And Councillor Senior Board raised the point about funding. We don't know if this £500,000 allocation is sufficient to make this work. We've no idea, no doubt we'll find out in due course, but let's hope it doesn't follow the model of central funding towards the police generally, because if it does, then I think we have a serious problem.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a strategic partnership document. The District Council is a member of that partnership as a responsible authority, so we have a duty to participate in this partnership activity across Norfolk as a whole. The Community Safety Partnership model recognises that no one public agency has total control or influence or ability to deliver against this agenda. So if people stray into crime through domestic violence or radicalisation or county lines drug trafficking, there is a myriad of issues, social and within outside of the law, illegality, that contributes to that behaviour. So it's not in the police's gift alone to tackle or address these issues. So the community safety partnership structure is intended to bring together all of the partnerships and agencies that can contribute, making Norfolk a safer place. So it isn't in our ability as a district council to own or deliver against this agenda in isolation here in Norfolk. We have a contribution that we can make. Mr. Hems has outlined how we've sought to do that through a senior officer, I himself in recent times, being our principal representative on the partnership, and as priorities have changed, how we resource officers to attend the domestic violence and sexual abuse board. And as Steve has mentioned, the structural changes in the management structure of the authority are intended to give us greater focus in responding and making our contribution to the partnership. So I think the questions that have been asked this morning are the right ones in terms of what knowledge do you have, how often do we report at a strategic level to you, so you can engage in a more informed way around these issues. And that's something that I can take away. In terms of the election of the new Police and Crime Commissioner just under 2 weeks ago, Mr. Snow will be advised and have this information placed in front of him. But this is evidence-based of the critical issues which, as a partnership, need to be addressed in Norfolk. As Mr. Hems has outlined, it demonstrates the change of the time, and North Norfolk remains one of the safest areas in one of the safest counties in the country. In that respect, we're very fortunate. But if you look at the delivery structure on page 27 and the 6 priority activities, Some of those issues won't impact on Norfolk significantly. We don't believe, from what we say, the operational relationship we have with our district command team, that county lines is a significant issue in North Norfolk, although the police do have police liaison officers who work with each of our high schools. You previously discussed at this council a recent motion about domestic abuse and sexual violence, so that is something that impacts on us here in North Norfolk. And we have recognised across Norfolk, including in North Norfolk, through COVID, the prominence or issues or deep-seatedness of some anti-slavery activities in terms of migrant workers and the terms in which they live and work. So these issues do touch upon us, and it's important that we have an understanding of those. But in commenting on this document, it is a partnership document, and we can ask for clarity around that. We can challenge and say, is there something about speeding because that is important? But it's not realistic for you to have an expectation that you can control delivery here in Norfolk around each of these things exclusively, because it's a partnership response. So I think there's more we can do for you, but I think the question today through Mr. Hens is, are there messages that we would like to take back corporately to influence this document, which will, I think, responding to Councillor Frederick's question, in terms of how it will shape the new ECC's priorities. This will be an evidence base, and his office will advise him on the journey that is outlined in this document, and then ask him to put his priorities in response to those issues. I hope that's. And there is a police and crime panel which operates at Norfolk County Council in a similar way to the HOSC, which is intended to hold the police and crime commissioner to account at a county level. I would hope and expect that in due course the police and crime commissioner will be prepared to meet with you through the scrutiny committee in the way that his predecessor has been.
Yes, I think that's very helpful background to that, and certainly it was my experience that prior to, I would say, around the early 2000, 2001, possibly 2002, community safety and crime was all the responsibility of the police in all respects, and a much wider partnership approach was taken from that point onwards. That was when the districts and boroughs and city councils had their own community safety partnerships formed. There was a county level partnership formed, and it was the in topic at that time. And I think it was right in the sense that safer communities depend on all of us. We've all got a part to play in one way, shape, or form. We cannot just point to our uniform police service and say, it's your responsibility for making us safe in all respects. That is not the case. And that was a significant turning point with regard to this particular topic, and that's the genesis, as I understand it. And prior to that point, pretty much everything pointed to the boys in blue, so to speak, and it was, I think, a very relevant change in strategy to involve other agencies on a more formal base, and to do this across, stop that silo working, but to do it across those agencies. It may have gone over the top in some respect in forming too many partnerships, and we know how that can work, or the impact of that. But certainly, I think we've got a bit of catching up to do. I personally feel, because I've been out of it for quite some time, and I'm mindful that some of you have probably not had that level of involvement. So I think we're kind of starting from a relatively poorly cited perspective when it comes to seeing a document of this kind, and we're lacking some of that background. But Mr.
I think the journey you described for community safety over the last 20 years is correct. I think when we had, and Mr. Hens outlined to you that each district council had a community safety partnership, and arguably there were nuances and differences across Norfolk in terms of that approach, in terms of the issues in Great Yarmouth or Norwich or King's Lynn are arguably different to Norfolk. But that very very localised response whereby particularly the district council, neighbourhood police teams and housing associations particularly intervened in low-level crime, antisocial behaviour, graffiti, people hanging on street corners or neighbour disputes, which do take up a lot of frontline time and can be joined up. There's been a greater move towards a focus on vulnerability through the early help structures to intervene. And I think the national trend around community safety has looked at those more strategic issues around county lines and drug trafficking out of large metropolitan areas into rural and provincial areas. The issues which perhaps we don't experience in Norfolk or Norfolk to any significant extent, but around race, hate or radicalisation, that's required a more strategic and multi-agency partnership response. I think what you've seen is the definition of community safety move to that more strategic partnership breadth rather than localised delivery. And I think this document outlines that to say we all have a stake, but that stake is differential and we can't all be involved in things. So that partnership relationship delivers a strong.
Yes, thank you very much for that. Councillor Buttercover, I'm mindful you had your hand raised, but
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make two brief points, but I know Councillor Butterworth
he's next on the list.
Thank you. Just on the speeding issue, I think it's a really important one. Perhaps it's one that you might be able to take back from the county councillor role, because they used to be a committee as part of the communities committee at County Hall that looked specifically at speeding and road traffic collisions. And I think there's a lot more work that committee could do if we set up. I think it would be a good idea. So that's that one. The other one is, I know that just before we went into COVID, Chief Executive and I have been talking with the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner about the possibility of having a person from their office based here in Norfolk to help us with domestic violence. And I hope that now we're past but moving through COVID, we may be able to revisit that, because I think it would be a good advantage for our residents. And I'd like to see that implemented. I know that resource would be exclusively in Norfolk, but we've just been talking that this should be a partnership, and I hope we can play our part in that.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We'll note that, and that will form part of our feedback. Councillor.
Just to say congratulations to Mr. Haynes. I've got somebody is talking to the police effectively because I've got my community update for the Stalham area. And the policing priorities are road-related offences with extra speeding being taken, policing taking place by PC Gibbs, fraud awareness, which is relevant to something that was raised today, and women's safety. So I would say that somebody is listening and somebody is reacting. So well done. Thank you.
I think thank you for that. I guess that's a report from the SNAP panel, say the Neighbourhood Action Partnership.
Yeah, that is the SNAP. Yeah.
And obviously that is a very localised approach to, and there's nothing wrong with that, because that's the whole, purpose of that kind of localised approach, is to gain the views of the people. But I think that's at one end of the spectrum, so to speak. What we did today is at the top level in strategic terms. So it's an interesting observation. It was also an interesting observation Councillor Brown made regarding speeding enforcement. I just happened to see one in Brighton this morning. Councillor Whittington.
Good morning, Chair. Am I close enough? Can that be heard? Yeah. Okay. first of all, I want to say I really welcome this document and obviously the work that's gone into it. And I really welcome the conversation that we're having, because I think it's brought quite a few misnomers that we probably had about how these things are being put together and how they're happening. I do hope that the Police Crime Commissioner, you know, although he's coming in very enthusiastic with his new agenda, that he will take account of this, because I think there are some really good focuses and some of the priorities have been identified. I'd like to go back to something Mr. Black said a minute ago, where he talked about the strategic partnership growth. And I think that's really important, that we don't get lost in our local locality. And I think this is something this document actually perhaps sways a little too much into. So quite often it comes through talking about locality leaders and visibly dependent on the locality. But there are issues where, such as domestic abuse and domestic violence, where I think we've gone down that route and it's become down to what's happened in your locality. And you know, sorry to use that cliche phrase, the postcode lottery. It has become a postcode lottery in some areas as to what support services, what response is there, how police are responding. And I think as a strategic document, this needs to strengthen that idea that all these things should have a common approach across the county. And then you look at what needs to be done in the locality, but there should be a general expectation of a standard level of action that's going to be taken across all the districts, not just the Norwich centred or South Norwich or something, which a lot of domestic abuse resources are directed at. Which takes me back to as well, I think from this conversation that we've had, I think we could have a really positive role of scrutiny to play here. And you know, I would like to see one of the recommendations, and there are a lot of C's, C's and P's and different things in the different acronyms, so I apologise if I get the different ones, but it seems that the community safety partnership, which is this document, feeds into the community police plan. Is that right, Mr. Hanks?
Sorry, unmuting. Yes, in effect, when the crime and police plan is being written, it will have regard to the strategic priorities set by the Norfolk County Community Safety Partnership.
Would a recommendation then for this committee be that we, once this has been established, that we actually focus then on the crime police panel documents, so that we can actually see what the outcomes are, because it could be two very different. I think that's a way of assessing whether the priorities have been watered down through the Police Crime Commission, or whether they've been strengthened, and whether that's been impacted on them. And I think that's where our role could be really, really important. So that's something I'd like to address.
Comment on that, Mr. Hanks?
Chair, I think those comments stand in their own right. It's entirely appropriate, and I think it would be worthwhile establishing just, what your scrutiny, bearing in mind that the Norfolk County Community Safety Partnership has its own scrutiny panel, and it has a North Norfolk District Council rep on that panel, because each of the districts are, so that's a district councillor. I think currently that's Tim Adams for North Norfolk, Councillor Tim Adams. So yes, it would be a question of what do you want to scrutinise, what are the outcomes that you want to look at in terms of your future scrutiny of the effectiveness of this strategic plan. And if that includes how it links into other documents, then that would be appropriate for you to consider.
I'm mindful that we've given this thereabouts the hour, which is a fair session, and I would like to try and close this matter if we can at this point. So what I'm hearing, I think, is that there are a number of questions which we've taken note of, more specific. I think that on a broader front, there are concerns about how we might influence this plan in the future, how that joins up and is accepted and funded and resourced by the Police and Crime Commission's office. A number of things around monitoring the outcomes and achievements of the plan, and probably some background stuff, because we are starting from a relatively low level. And I'm wondering whether, in addition to sending the questions, that we should also perhaps give this some committee time, perhaps in a few months' time, when the Police and Crime Commissioner has got his feet under the table, so to speak, when he's had the chance to look at this plan, look at our comments, to not make a meal of it, so to speak, but to invite him back, and perhaps the author of this document back, to say what's happened between May of this year and, let's say, it's September that we invite them back. What has happened? How have you used our feedback? Where is the direction? And can you tell us a bit more about this, a bit more about that? Would that be something that you would find useful? How's that?
Also, it might be worth the committee looking at the Cambridge Harm Index, which is on the internet, which I've just been reading through, flicking through as we've been discussing, because if you read that, it's the foundations of how, as Mr. Kent said, this report's been compiled, and it's very interesting. But I think the committee will be very interesting to read.
Okay, thank you for that. So I guess there's a number of recommendations that need to be kind of knocked into shape there. Is that sort of sufficient in terms of detail? We can formulate those a little.
Yes, I think just to clarify, we're not in a position to make kind of formal recommendations. We can certainly take a note of those questions and we can direct those to the OPCC. And then, as you have suggested, Chairman, we do have on the next item, obviously we will have a visit from the new PCC in the year ahead. And if this strategy and it's linking up with the community policing strategy is something you want to look at, then that's a good opportunity to do that and address kind of where this goes and how it feeds into policing. So I think that's a good opportunity there.
Yeah, I think there's probably a distinction to be made between recommendations about changing the plan and recommendations on the way forward for this committee and fully dealing with these matters further on in our work program. So maybe there's kind of two issues there, but I think there are a number of recommendations that we need to progress, and we need to build them either into our work program or into some other way of progressing them. So I wouldn't like us to lose sight of these points that have been quite recently raised.
But we just add, Chairman, as well, that as has been raised, that there is that panel at county level, and perhaps we can have an update. I think it was mentioned that Councillor Tim Adams is the representative. Perhaps we can ask him to provide feedback from those meetings to keep us informed of progress on that, as opposed to similar. We had the situation with the work of NOS. We don't want to be in a position where we're essentially kind of repeating the work that has already taken place at county. So perhaps we can have that conversation and feedback back to the committee meeting.
Does that make sense? Okay, I guess we're probably looking to delegate this report and to make our own comments and in the way that I've described and take it forward that way. Do I have a proposer to follow that particular line and second? Councillor and Councillor. We have a show of hands then to progress the matter in that way. That looks to be unanimous to me. Thank you very much indeed. I'm Mindful that the slash update is at the back end of our agenda, and I think Councillor Gay is waiting to deliver an update on that.
I've just had an update on that actually. Obviously, due to limitations in the space available in the chamber, we are pretty much at capacity right now. Virginia was advised not to attend because we basically can't accommodate. She has sent a statement which I'm happy to read out on her behalf, just to say that, and she's watching on YouTube as well. Obviously, she's not permitted, unfortunately, as a member to join remotely. Participating members have to be in attendance. So her statement just reads, this applies to Rob Young as well, who's not able to be here. Ladies and gentlemen, we're sorry not to be with you in the chamber this morning. The report on the construction of the reef is before you. We have nothing to add for today, but if you do have questions, we will give written answers to you as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody wish to raise any questions?
Just to say that when we have people elect it might be nice to move that to the front of the agenda so that she can come and go quite quickly.
Yeah, I think that's not really reasonable. Any other observations? Okay, we'll have to look at and the proposer. Show of hands. Thank you. That's really amazing. Right. So turning to item 11, which is the work program for this committee, running from 2022.
Yep, so what I have done here, as previously, is prepared my screen, a work program of all of the kind of planned items we have in the coming months and the expected items. We've got the recurring items in there as well, and then we have some further potential items that need scoping, and perhaps some more than others at the back to see where we can fit them in. I think the main thing to note here is that for the next 2, possibly 3 months, we're already fairly busy in terms of committee work. And then we do have flexibility for items to come forward from kind of October onwards. So really what I need you to do today is just to agree that you're happy with that draft work programme as is. If there's anything else you want to raise to go on there as a potential future item, and then if you have any comments on those other potential items that we're looking to get in. I have in those potential items highlighted the ones in yellow that I think we can get on there fairly quickly if need be. I think it was Gerard raised that preventative maintenance strategy. I think we can, if we have a chat with the relevant officers, discuss that in the short term and perhaps in 2 to 3 months' time. Again, looking at the North Ocean Heritage Action Zone project, and that has of course been progressing in the background. And I think there was a general consensus that the officers working on that would be happy to provide an update on that project as and when required. So really open to you to comment on the existing draft. Really.
Thank you, Matt. Questions, comments?
Just with regard to the asset maintenance, it's going to be quite a sizable field to deal with, and wonder whether it might be more suited for a finished group to handle that one rather than for the committee. I'll keep it more tightly focused and speed things up. That's a suggestion, Jim.
Yeah, something that isn't mentioned on this work programme, obviously there is the potential for the scrutiny panels to start working in the year ahead, and we're still not in a position where we have any kind of work ready for them yet. I know that there has been a cabinet working party established to deal with those items as well. So certainly in the future, and that's perhaps why it's not fully on the work programme and a specified date yet into how and when we kind of review those is up for discussion. You'll see on that time cycle, on that kind of on the potential items, that some of those there say that they are a potential panel item. Certainly the ones that are perhaps too detailed or just too broad. So there's economic development strategy on there, but that's obviously an enormous subject, and I think we would need to certainly scope that on what you want to look at specifically. And as you suggest, they're perhaps something that would be better suited to those detailed panel discussions rather than the wider committee. So I think that, yeah, just remains to be discussed in the future, really, how and when that is addressed.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. As you know, me and Evan sit on the panels. I was just wondering how you'd like us to report back to you. Do you want us to circulate the minutes to you, or?
Yeah, we do get those. I know it's been a challenging year. I would think we have the updates at the end of the agenda. Perhaps if the representatives, you and Emma, were happy to provide kind of just a short verbal update at that time, I think that'd be really helpful for the committee to just quickly understand the issues that are being looked at and how they're being addressed. So that would be really appreciated if possible.
I think that might be, yes, I think it might be correct. The minutes are fine, but of course they are rather a sort of what we call a fairly stilted, not anyway. but they are a formal record of the meeting, and I think it would be useful to have sometimes overlaid on that your impressions, because you know that may be a perfectly accurate reflection, as I said, what was discussed and decided, but not necessarily, that may not necessarily be in the best interest of Norfolk. And you may well have presented a very cogent argument for a particular course of action, but that was not followed, and that may not necessarily have been explained very well in the minutes, you know, as full as it might be. So it's sometimes useful to have that local nuance, if you like, on the minutes themselves. Okay. Any other comments? Councillor.
Looking through this and going back to what Matt said about scoping, there's some issues that are coming up that it might be worthwhile, I think, having a look at those before we start asking for massive reports of offices and making it more focused. So, and, you know, I think that perhaps that conversation about scoping, and that came up in our training, if you remember, it was quite evident there that it was good practice to have a very clear focus of what you wanted from that report, rather than just a review of the housing enforcement strategy or whatever. It needs to be more specific. So, I think there's a few coming up looking at planning performance review in September. I think that's a classic example of that, where we need to be determining very closely what we actually want from that.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think we need to have a conversation with the officers involved into, you know, what the expectations are, and also just not in a formal committee setting, but more of a informal discussion about what the committee wants to see for those as well. Yeah.
Any other comments? Are you happy then to agree the items which should be added to the work scrutiny programme for 21-22? Second, please. Second, or in favour, please. Thank you. Right, moving on then to item 12, Office Delegated Decisions, March to April 2021.
I think so. Emma Denny prepared this report, and she is in attendance remotely. If she wants to add anything or say anything, I don't know if she's available. remotely.
Any questions anybody has in relation to the list of decisions? Pages 49 to 54. No? The applicant to receive their notes. Please. The register of officer decisions taken on the right, we dealt with the Sheringham Leisure Centre at item 14, and we have item 14.
Yes.
Just to note that Philip is going to present this one remotely. Hopefully he's there yet. Philip, I will just add that you may need to speak up for the benefit of people in the chamber. Andrew, I believe you were going to excuse yourself at this time due to peculiar interest. And the only other thing to say was just to remind members that the information contained within the enforcement board matrix is restricted information. So if people want to discuss details, there will need to be a vote to move the meeting into private business and stop the live stream. So just be careful of that detailed information, please.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Mr. Rosen, are you ready to introduce this topic? I just would add before you do, I'm very mindful that this is a very detailed document with a lot of information in it, and I'm going to propose an approach, and you may wish to kind of consider this when you present the document. The approach I have in mind, there is a serious invitation to all of this, because I suspect most of us have got items there which are in our boards and may well have questions for them. This is not the time and the place to pursue those particular issues, and I would therefore suggest that we focus on what I would call high-level considerations in relation to the effectiveness of the enforcement processes, managing case volume and progress timescales, and the quality and satisfaction of outcomes. They seem to me to be the key issues at a relatively high level that we as a committee ought to be most interested in. The particular issues that you might have in your board might be useful as an example to say that, let's say something's been proceeding for a matter of years. Some of them certainly have. Then that might be an issue over timescale. You might have issues around the quality of the outcomes, and sort of, and those are the sort of things that, by all means, let's hear those. But let's not get into the detail of precisely what has happened at which particular point and the whys and wherefores. I don't know whether that's helpful, Mr. Rosen, but hopefully that will give you some idea of what we might be wanting to consider. So I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. That's a helpful preface and gives me an understanding of the scope and interest from the committee today. The report that's in front of you relates to overview and scrutiny's consideration of the enforcement functions relating to planning, to long-term empty homes, and in terms of the enforcement board and the combined enforcement team As you can see to the summary in the report, the Council's enforcement functions cover a much, much wider area than just these specific considerations. So the report itself concerns itself with reporting on those issues. We will be reporting to you on a 6-monthly basis and taking your considerations and recommendations forward to the Cabinet for their final decision making on this matter. Importantly, I think it's clear for me to say to you that the enforcement process here at North Norfolk is one which is moving forward. You can see in this report there are some landmark cases that have moved forward during the time of COVID. We have cases such as the Shannocks, which are significantly advanced as a result of a lot of hard work between different services at this council and partner authorities working together. And that's a key element of the Enforcement Board's work. What it presents is an opportunity for officers across the council to work together on a fortnightly or monthly basis to advance significant landmark cases. So the Enforcement Board, I believe, is carrying forward good work and is actually taking forward the more difficult, long-standing cases in our district. They still require more work. You can see that there are cases for your wards and cases that you're familiar with. In terms of the long-term empty issues, you can see that the council continues to perform better than the national average. We have less than 1% of the district's housing subject to long-term empty measures. Sean Knight and his team work particularly hard in this area and have been effective, as you can see, in closing down the number of long-term empties that we have. But there is more work to be done. We work through the Enforcement Board, as I say, on those difficult, harder to reach cases. In terms of the combined enforcement team, you can see that their numbers stand currently at 290 live cases, and that from January 2020, that the combined enforcement team have closed down 264 cases. Inevitably, we uncover difficult and complex cases as we move forward, but the team of 2.5 officers, I believe, are performing well and are actually closing down cases in an effective and efficient way. I will welcome your comments on that particular area. We work forward in terms of the combined enforcement team in accompaniment to the adopted enforcement plan for North Norfolk. Bob Wade, who is the interim manager for the enforcement team, will be working with me to review that enforcement plan. And in the months to come, when we next report to you, I hope that we will be reporting back on recommended changes that will be included in the District Council's new enforcement plan, which is due to be reported towards the end of this year. Thank you, Chairman. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Racer. Comments, questions? Councillor Fredericks.
Thank you very much, and thank you. I was just thinking about how we as members check up on cases that are in our wards. Is there any way that we can do that online rather than emailing the officers? Because I'm acutely aware that their time is incredibly precious. And on that note, I really welcome the fact that we're going to have an online form to triage as well. I think that massively cut down the amount of time that they're looking at emails. But rather than a huge report, it'd be helpful if we had some kind of access where we could look at a case, and our constituents are constantly emailing about cases, and we have to email the officers for updates. Is there any way that we can make that a little bit more streamlined? Thank you.
Mr. Racer.
Through you, Chairman, the report that you've got in front of you and the matrix that accompanies it relate to the Enforcement Board. As we said earlier on, the Enforcement Board is not a measure of all the enforcement cases that are going forward. I mentioned that we have currently 264 live cases to be dealt with this year. So from that point of view, Councillor Fredericks, my suggestion is that we will continue to provide a bespoke service to emails that are directed towards the enforcement team. Our enforcement service manager is working towards a computerized questionnaire, a potential of contacting officers in a more efficient way. Unfortunately, we have a limited number of officers, and therefore requesting progress updates really does need to be done in that way. We carry so many cases, it is very difficult for the service or the manager to report reliably across over 200 cases to individual ward members. So if we can work on the basis of the ward councillors contacting the officers when they need information, that is the most effective and efficient way for us to use that resource.
Just to follow on from that, Mr. President, perhaps I'm just excluding my own ignorance. So my belief is that there is an online access to the progress and work of the enforcement cases that we can access from home. Is that correct?
I would just say, Philip, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the Enforcement Board Matrix is available in the document library on Modern Gov, which you can access through the internet. I appreciate that internet access has not been brilliant over the past year. We hope we've now resolved most of those issues. It's still somewhat slow because you have to access the internet through a VPN on iPads, but just to note that, so essentially a routinely updated document, I think it comes through about every 2 weeks. That matrix is available on the internet if you go through MonGov. If necessary, I can help members to find that.
Okay, thank you.
Through you, Chairman, if I can respond. Thank you, Matt. It's important we don't confuse the Enforcement Board Matrix, which is the document that accompanies this report, with the general consideration of the progression of enforcement complaints. For example, most cases on the Enforcement Board Matrix are pretty much concluded enforcement investigations. They tend to be cases where enforcement notices have been served, where the action of prosecution or compliance with those notices is being sorted. I think Councillor Fredericks' question was a more generic question about existing ongoing enforcement complaints. Now, there is access through public access on our service for you to be able to see the individual cases. I would always suggest checking on public access, but contacting the case officer to make sure that you have the absolutely up-to-date point of any complaint and any investigation. These investigations can move quite quickly. It may be that the case officer is actually at a point where the investigation may be about to move forward. And so if we rely purely on computerized information on public access for you as ward members, I think that can lead to a situation where fast-moving cases will be updated and you may be giving information that might not be absolutely up to date at that time. The officers will always be pleased to speak with you.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, because as I said myself, I've never actually accessed that online. I've always addressed my questions to the officer direct, but I was conscious that I might be missing a trick, but it seems that it's possibly not. It's probably the method that you are advocating if we want the up-to-date situation on any given enforcement case. So thank you for that. Okay, next on my list, I've got Councillor Mancini-Boyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Robson, this is a very tricky part of your job, but it must be probably a bit like skating uphill. Can you tell me the process of how you're actually going from the start of finding a property that's, for instance, been empty for 3 or 4 years? I've got it written down here. Do you put on a empty dwelling management order once you find a property that's not being used? And the second point I'd like to make is obviously you're going to run into probate quite a lot. And then at the end of the process, am I right in saying when you've actually got hold of the house, which is probably fall into pieces anyway. Do we have way too expensive doing it completely up to then rent out to our local residents? Is that the process? And at some point, do you sort of say to yourself, it's really not worth it? Or do you always go from start to finish? Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Sorry, it was a bit more winded.
Through you, Chairman, in response to Councillor Mancini-Boyle. Do you know, I wish there was a case which progressed along the textbook. Most do not. And I have to say that the vast majority of long-term empty cases are generally resolved by the escalation of the council tax banding. Sean Knight and his team work very hard to ensure that they've got accurate data. So what you'll find is that it is the vast majority of empty homes that are resolved within a 3, 6 or 12-month period. What then follows is we have visiting officers. Sally Tidman is one of our visiting officers who go around the district and check the status of those properties, and they monitor those properties in terms of decay, in terms of signs of habitation. Clearly, it's important that we're getting our council tax paid, full stop. That's an element that is critical to this council. We have excellent records for chasing up non-payers. The situation that we're describing is one where the home may be left empty for longer periods. And as you describe, probate is a significant matter. We have several cases on the enforcement board matrix which are subject to matters of probate. We have family disputes, we have issues where those homes are not moving forward through probate. We have some homes that are not actually subject to any known ownership, so they have to proceed through the Crown, and we have to look at trying to make progress with our multi-agency approaches. The difficulty we have is that it is the limited number of properties that are falling into long-term empty status. As you can see, there are not many on the matrix for the enforcement board. Those that we're acting on tend to be in more remote areas. They tend to be in locations whereby the properties themselves may have limited future potential. We will serve Section 215 planning enforcement notices where we have untidy sites. We will talk to the owners of the site where they are known to progress the matters of the repair and rehabilitation of those units. I would say to you members that we have some individuals out there who simply do not want to appear to occupy those homes again. And the use of an EDMO, empty homes legislation, is something we certainly consider. I would say to you members that the use of that legislation is very, very limited in North Norfolk. And it is one that we have explored and we will look at through our housing strategy. What is important is that our housing strategy that has been redefined links into the empty home strategy. And we're working very closely with Graham and Nikki and their teams to make sure that that's the case. And you will see the housing strategy developing towards the end of this summer. Thank you, Chairman.
In the absence of the chairman who stepped out momentarily, I think we had Councillor Heinrich next. Or was it?
I think it was Councillor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Rowson. I was just concerned about it seems to be an under-resourced area, in my opinion. I'm very impressed with the humanity and decency of the way this council deals with some difficult cases. But this is possibly interpreted as a laissez-faire attitude at parish council level. And there is a perception that enforcement is not number one of our priorities. Would you agree with me that perhaps we ought to look at human resources in this area and look for an increase in that? I'm also loath to say there's a delicate matter in an area I'm concerned with, and it's only appeared on the matrix relatively recently, where I know it has been under investigation for some time. I'm worried that this is perhaps a sign of the under-resourced nature of this area. Thank you very much.
Through the chair, my experience of working in enforcement is relatively long. I've served over 30 years in local government, and I've always considered that the enforcement process, certainly in terms of planning, is absolutely critical. Without effective enforcement, the process is somewhat toothless, and there are those that would argue that the planning process is somewhat void if we're not enforcing appropriately. I would tend to agree with that. My view in terms of this authority is that we have 2 investigating officers. We have 1 visiting officer principally working on empty homes, and we have an interim service manager who is working on a limited number of days in the week. I'm working with the team and I'm supporting the team on those major cases. So they have the benefit of my assistance over a significant amount of my working week also. I would say to you that it is critical that we are fully resourced as soon as possible, and that operating on 2.5 enforcement planning team members is proving to be difficult. However, the team do move forward and they are closing cases, as you can see in this area. I would very much say that the approach to enforcement in North Norfolk has not been laissez-faire in my time here. I think you can see that there are cases that are challenged and there is progress being delivered, as you can see in section 2 of the report. The difficulty is that the cases that you see on the enforcement board are long-standing historic cases, and those cases require significant investment in time and resources. I believe that there may be a case to be made, and I'm looking to review this with the manager of the service to provide more administrative support to enable the officers to focus on a more greater degree on the casework that they find in front of them. Once we're fully staffed and perhaps with more administrative support, then we may be able to review whether or not we require more resource into the team in terms of additional investigating officers. But I would report through the chairman, for a district of our size, of this nature, this rurality, then 3 officers in an enforcement team is not exceptional. That is just about par. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Yes, I was just wondering, would the enforcement team be helped by a task and finish group to monitor the it's not backlog, I'm sorry, the ongoing cases, and so it can report to overview scrutiny as to whether we are satisfied with the progress, and that may give some guidance to if we are under-resourced in this area.
Again, through you, Chairman, in response to that question, this is the first report that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee has seen for some considerable time. My suggestion would be that rather than moving straight towards a task and finish group, that we take the next report to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee and take the views of Cabinet with regard to the progress that's being made with enforcement. And perhaps when we've reviewed that next report and you can then see the number of cases that are being closed by this team, then I would suggest that that would be an appropriate step rather than moving straight to a task and finish group from the first report that you've seen in over 18 months. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. On my own behalf, I just probably would like to add a little bit to that question, because I think you've rightly pointed out that enforcement and the effectiveness of enforcement is absolutely critical and paramount in upholding the credibility of the planning system. And I'm also mindful that public expectations are quite high with regard to enforcement. And it is the case that local people often see planning situations which are, in that view, not being followed up, or not being followed up in quick enough time, or not being followed up in terms of the effectiveness of the work that's being done. So those expectations are very high. It may be a generalist perception, but I think it's probably my experience that I would describe the enforcement service as one being under stress most of the time in my 14 years of being here and seeing cases come and go. And that stress level, I guess, varies from time to time, and you would know more about that on a day-to-day basis. And I'm very interested in the resources that you commented on. But I have to say, I tend to believe that it may be around sections, but my experience suggests that we tend to be under-resourced and not perhaps able to meet the public expectations as well as we might. And I say that rather cautiously, but that's where my level of concern, I think, rests mostly. Don't know whether you would like to come back on that.
I think, Chairman, there is an issue about the perception of planning enforcement as a colloquial blue light service. We can't operate that way. The law doesn't allow us to do that. Planning enforcement has to operate within the laws and the rules that we're given. The difficulty that we have is that it is not a criminal breach to not comply with your planning conditions. It's not a criminal offence to start building without gaining planning permission. Many developers and landowners are aware of this. Our team will continue to monitor the complaints that are received, but I can't think of another authority that I have ever worked in that actually is anything other than reactive to the complaint process. It is almost, I believe, impossible to have a proactive enforcement service which is monitoring every case that has permission that may be coming forward. We have a service that receives 2,500 applications a year. Those permissions can be built out over 3 years. Some are being built out historically, as you know, across the district. So the volume of work is at this moment actually quite significant. We have more housing completions this year than we've had in any other year over the last 5. So from that point of view, there is a lot of development work going on. And I think it's important that we use the enforcement plan as the parameters within which the council delivers enforcement. I'll be very happy to speak with parish councils, and I'll be very happy to speak with individuals if they're concerned about the speed of delivery and the way in which enforcement is being delivered in our district. But I think there is a concern in my mind, and this has existed for a long time, that the planning enforcement service cannot deliver an overnight fix to breaches of planning control. And I think that's an important message that we need to get out, and that it's important to say that our service must balance a wide range of issues, and that we cannot stop people making planning applications retrospectively. They're able to do that. They can seek to comply with legislation after they've broken it. That's very frustrating, but it is a situation where effectively, if the enforcement team are able to gain a planning application, and that planning application can be moderated to deliver an effective permission at the end of the day, then I would say to you members that the enforcement process has worked in that circumstance. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I recognise what you say, and undoubtedly find the very nature of this work is reactive. not proactive. I think most people kind of understand that it's probably how one manages the public expectations in that context of being reactive, and given the limitations, as you rightly say, about what is achievable and what is, and indeed the timescales and opportunities that people have to appeal the process. Well, the deadlines on the report, I think, in some ways speak for themselves. So thank you very much for that. Councillor House, have you?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You might just turn the live feed off from the question.
You're looking to ask a question about a specific case?
Yes.
Then you would need to propose that we move into private business.
May I propose that then, Mr. Chairman, please? It's a short question.
Yes. Can we handle that outside? I think it was certainly, that's the reason why I did the introduction that I did. I'm hoping that we might avoid this. If there is an issue, then we can take that up on a one-to-one basis.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Councillor Hyde. And
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
sorry. I beg your pardon. Right. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can just return to the long-term empty homes issue. It seems to be a steady rise over the last year. It dropped by 3 in the last period for it. I presume some of that is down to, as you previously said, probate in the issue of the last 12 months or so. How accurate is that figure? When was the last empty dwellings audit carried out? That's question one. The second question is really the 543 properties nominally empty. How many of those have we obtained dwelling management orders for? If we're not pursuing those, is there a reason other than staffing shortages?
Thank you, Chairman. The audio is a little bit intermittent. I'll try to answer as best I can. If I miss anything, please do come back to me. Hopefully I'm coming through loud and clear. The position with empty homes has been impacted by COVID. It is absolutely clear that that has been the case. We are in a situation where prosecutions through council tax were actually stopped for a period of time in the early stages of the pandemic. What is now happening is that those prosecutions are moving forward, and we are in a situation where there is a backlog of cases at the courts. Those are causing us difficulties with our most difficult empty homes cases. I believe that the record of compliance outside of those more difficult cases is good, but has been impacted by the COVID crisis in terms of the difficulties and the humanity of pursuing people over accelerated enforcement of council tax claims. I can bring back more details to the member concerned in a bespoke written response when I've spoken directly with Sean Knight.
Councillor Toy, I'm just conscious that I did jump.
No,
And I'll give you then.
no, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to help with the clarity around getting people's perceptions changed. We had previously, we had the community partnerships discussion, and where we've seen people have changed from the expectation of a policeman turning up to deal with everything, we now have partnerships. And the same is with enforcement. People have the expectation for an enforcement officer to turn up and to suddenly things, happen. And that has changed since I think it was 2013, and the enforcement panel was set up, and it's now multi-agency to deal with it, because often it's not a simple case that's made. There may be other effects that have made people take their action that they've done. So, you know, we sometimes it means engagement with the early help hub as well to deal with the issues that have led people to make those decisions. So I think that's part of the message to go out. And as Officer Rowson has you know, kindly offered, you know, to help that understanding with parish councils, to go and help deliver that message, to help them to understand the things and the processes that they have to go through. So yeah, as the portfolio that says enforcement, but clearly this sits across several portfolios, you know, we welcome the opportunity to help people to understand why it takes time sometimes. It's not as simple as we would like it to be, you know, as we had a perception before. So hopefully that was all I wanted to do was add that to that picture to help that understanding when we're talking to the communities that we deal with. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to sort of think about a message that we want to come back from ONS today, really. And it seems to me that there's a lot of work going on. I mean, there have been some successes recently. Sheringham looks like Demolition City at the moment, thanks to the Shannocks coming down at an incredible rate. And it's well worth going to have a look at. You only have another couple of days to see the last bits coming down, so it's quite a tourist attraction. But you know, that's good. But I think the message that I'm feeling from here is that there is a will from ONS, from members and the cabinet certainly, that we would, you know, we support the work of enforcement and being a strong organisation that's backing up our planning department. And so, you know, I'd like to send a message to cabinet that we would like to see the strengthening of enforcement, you know, and really ensure this approach of looking to be humane and considerate, but at the same time provide that support to planning through a strong enforcement team. And I think that's, for me, that's the message that I would like to be going back today.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Rowson, would you find that a helpful thing for our open and scrutiny to do?
Sorry, Chairman, I'm working on a laptop today. My muting and unmuting is not what it should be. Yeah, absolutely, members. You know, I found this discussion this morning really helpful. It enables me to reflect on the expectations of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. It's been heartening to hear that you're so supportive and you're looking carefully at the capacities, the potential to look at maybe a task and finish group as we move forward. We can certainly look at that, consider it with you. But I think it's really good to hear those words from Councillor Withington, that there is this support for a difficult process. When an enforcement case comes in, it's not like a planning application. No one's put a neat red line around the site. No one's provided you with an environmental impact assessment. No one has told you if the breaches you've got are the only breaches you're going to see. This is not an easy process. I have incredible praise for the team that are doing this job in the field. They do a very good, very committed job, and I will take back the praise that you've given the team today, and also listen to those questions that you've raised and reflect on them. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you for that. Yes, I mean, I think where we're at, as I'm sensing as a committee, is that clearly there are concerns, and those concerns I'm not sure would amount to criticisms at the moment, but I think what they certainly do is they add content to a situation. We haven't seen, as you rightly said, an enforcement update, certainly in my 2 years chairing this committee. So we are, I think, overdue by quite a large measure. And to some extent, our level of knowledge on what is going on in a scrutiny sense has not been current. You've just brought us up to date. It is a fact that the whole planning system does rely on enforcement in order to maintain that credibility. I think from what I've heard, we do have concerns that you should be adequately resourced. And if there is a level of stress within the team that is abnormal, then I think we would wish to see that addressed in the appropriate way. So I think there are indications that we would like to see more and be kept up to date more currently with planning enforcement. And so I think we're probably moving towards a recommendation. I don't know anybody else, further questions they want to raise, but certainly in terms of a recommendation, I think I will pull forward the recommendation made by Councillor Whittington that we add our support and would wish to see consideration given to the balance of resources and tasks as far as the enforcement work goes. Does anybody else have anything that they wish to add at this stage?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if anybody else, when this document came through my door, my heart did sink to me. And that's a question I've asked before. When is this council going to be paperless? Because I'm looking at an environmental nightmare sitting around with all these documents. So I'm capable of looking online, and I'm the greatest IT in the world. I'm capable of doing that. And I find it incredible it's still doing it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Indeed.
In terms of return to the paperless documents, Gerard, I know this is obviously a big agenda with the enforcement board matrix. Returning to paper agendas was a temporary solution because we understand if you're trying to participate in a meeting at home on your iPad, you can't look at the agenda at the same time. As we're now moving back to in-person meetings and you can have your iPad there with the agenda, I will begin reducing paper numbers again, and so long as everyone is happy. I know that not everyone will agree to this, but perhaps stop the process of kind of automatically sending you paper copies of agenda.
Okay, right.
Yes, can I just come back to you? I've just been saved by the bell, actually. I've just had an email from the House of Commons, which takes me back to the point I wanted to make. So, no need.
Okay, thank you. Any others? No, okay, well, I think you've probably heard sufficient from us to not be surprised that we would want to see more in the future with regard to updates on enforcement. And so that's something that we'll add to our work list. And we probably will aim to have a different type of report, perhaps more targeted than maybe the current report. And we'll work on that and develop what our needs might be and discuss them with you in the future. So thank you for that. Right, so we are required, I think, to note the continued progress of the enforcement board and the combined enforcement team.
Can I just ask, I don't know if it was raised in the formal recommendation, there was lots of discussion and consideration given to the resourcing of that team. Philip, you might be able to answer, is that something that's already kind of under consideration of this? Would a formal recommendation assist that in any way?
Thank you, Matt. Again, through you, Chairman, to say, any capacity that's added to a busy service would be helpful. We are looking at the administration of the planning service and its business modelling, and inevitably some of that remodelling will touch enforcement. So there is an element of funding and resourcing that may come to enforcement, but a note from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee saying that you are concerned and would support additional resources in this area could be nothing but helpful.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Then, so we've got one recommendation there that notes the continued progress of the enforcement order by the enforcement team. I think we've got the makings of the second recommendation that the Cabinet gives consideration to resources or resource enhancement of the planning enforcement service. Is that something that I'm getting nods? Fine, okay. So we'll have a second recommendation along those lines, Matt, please. So with those two recommendations in mind, do I have a proposer? So that way, all in favour, please. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, moving to item 15 then.
Excuse me, Chairman, can I call in Councillor Brown?
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Yes. Sorry, I neglected to consider that you were.
That's okay, Mr. Chairman.
So moving to item 15 then, Cabinet Work Programme, page 277 to 278.
Yeah, the only thing really to add here is that in that draft scrutiny work programme, which was prepared in advance of the Cabinet Work Programme changing, there has been a slight change in that the outturn report will now go to the, I think, 1 month later, in July potentially. I could be wrong there. And just to note that the quality and diversity policy is expected to go to the June Cabinet meeting. I don't think there's anything else to add there. Perhaps you'll see that the housing strategy is on the Cabinet Work Programme for July. We are hopefully expecting that to come as a pre-scrutiny item to next month's meeting, subject to the approval of Cabinet and the report being prepared in time. But I have had initial discussions with the officers, so we're hopefully going to bring that forward.
Thank you very much. Any questions on that? We move on then to the overview scrutiny work programme.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't added the work programme again because I didn't think there was any point in printing it twice. You've already seen that work programme for today and agreed that. The only other thing to add really is if you have any questions on the actions list from the last meeting. I think we've already discussed those recommendations on the environmental charter have been accepted, and just looking at the community renewal and levelling up funds, that was noted. So I don't think there's anything to add there either, unless anyone has any questions.
Any questions in relation to the overview scrutiny work programme or the actions or no? Okay. Are you happy to note then those two work programmes? Proposal and second, please. All in favour, please. Right, okay, we don't have any reasons to exclude the public, so that is the end of our agenda. So thank you everybody for contributing today. Actually, it's not been too stressful experience in trying to bring together the three presences, that's actual and those contributing remote and those watching on YouTube. So thank you very much, my lord.